Yes.
Okay, so I will get that started.
All right, I'm happy to start, and I wondered if y'all might do that. And I didn't prepare slides, although I could.
Oh, no, that's not
Okay.
necessary.
All right. There's follow-up information that I'm happy to send along. You know, as I was looking at the questions and looking at this group that you have gathered here today, what a great group to have this conversation to really talk about it from the state, local, and regional perspectives. And just want to acknowledge that as we do the work at the state level, I'm very appreciative of all of the providers that are serving kids and families, and of our colleagues at the city and county as well, because I think one of the things that we're really working to do is understand what we can do at the state level and where can the city and county sort of come alongside or build on what the state is doing. As we think about how we increase access to care, I think one of the foundational pieces here is our childcare subsidy rates. And right now, we are really paying based on the market rate, sort of what the market can bear. And looking through some of the articles that you sent out, you see that it's really expensive to pay for childcare, and the rates that the state is paying don't cover those true costs. And so there's work that is happening to take a look at the true cost of care. And I think some really foundational pieces to that are our infant and toddler rates, which we know are not covering the cost right now. And I think if we can get the rates to a space that is in a different place, that allows us to do a couple of things. One, hopefully get to the point where we can get to the living wage piece for providers, because I think staffing, as you have likely heard from many folks, is a challenge, and being able to pay providers that wage is a challenge. I think a second piece is, like I said, getting more providers able to accept childcare subsidy because the rate can cover what their costs are. I think some of the other things that come to mind that we've heard in our conversations is that the children who are coming into care right now, whether it is childcare or state funded pre-K, or you have Ryan here, as well, as we think about our 3 to 5 year old preschool population, are just coming with more complex needs than they had in the past. And so really thinking about how we're supporting complex needs, what is our strategy for inclusion? So making sure that providers have what they need, that kids and families are going to spaces that meet their needs, I think is really important. And then another thing that often comes up are non-standard hours, and some of the rates or strategies around non-standard hour care when we have families that are not always working traditional 9 to 5 jobs. And we've done some work and had some conversations, and I think, you know, the providers here can share as well. You know, I'm not sure that just increasing the non-standard hour bonus is the strategy to get more non-standard hours care out there, but we've heard that that is certainly a need to increase access to that type of care. I think the other thing that we have seen some big movement on at the federal level is that our subsidy rates and our subsidy policies don't always function like the private market does, but you're seeing some changes there, right? So the feds just released some rules, and I'll give a concrete example of what I mean when I say that. When my kids were in childcare, I had to pay the same amount no matter how many days they were there. And I paid at the beginning of the month before the provider provided services. And right now, we're not quite there on the state level, but the feds have released some rules that ask us to get closer to that. So things like paying based on enrollment rather than attendance. doing what they call prospective payment. So paying at the beginning of the month instead of having to wait till the end of the month to bill for the services that were provided. And then another thing that the CCDF requirements ask us to look at are things like contracts for childcare deserts, high need geographic areas, and just really thinking about how are we doing contracted slots or grants to providers. Now, as I say all of that, those federal rules have come down, does not have money attached with it. And so we know that we need to think about what the funding mechanism for that would look like. But I think rates, staffing, getting things closer to the private market, and increasing the number of families that are eligible for subsidy. Because right now, even though we go up to 60% of the state median income, you still have families who are beyond that who might not be able to
Nicole,
afford.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up a little bit.
Yep. So that was my last point, is that rates, staffing, really thinking about how you're increasing the number of families that are eligible for care, I think are some key strategies to getting us to be able to have universal access.
Thank you. So Ryan? Yeah.
And I'm going to take this in a different route. At OSPI, our focus specifically when we're considering our children with disabilities, it's looking at access across the system. So I so appreciate Nicole's perspective on the fundamentals of our childcare systems in that regard, because it's so complex. And that's what our families are navigating. So the work that I do at OSPI, as I said, is specifically geared towards children with disabilities within that preschool age range. We know that children with disabilities don't start their disability at 3. These are oftentimes disabilities that of any sort that our families are navigating through systems at birth or prenatal. So what we want to think through is how do we create systems of continuity of support for our families. And so when I start to think about, you know, where we lean in for advocacy, it really is around access for children and families. And it's not just children, but it really is families. How do we ensure that children and families who have a disability or a complex need or have a significant medical need are able to access services regardless of wage, income, location? We talk about zip code. We need to ensure, and that's what we're seeing right now within the research that we've done, the activities that we engage with our school districts and our families overall, is that we have a very hard let's just say an uphill battle that we have been fighting over the course of time for children with disabilities once they get into that 3 to 5 year old age range to access what we call a regular early childhood program. This is a general education setting, which if you were in a school system, it would be your gen ed classroom versus a separate or self-contained setting where a resource room of sorts when you're talking K-12. Why this is important in preschool is that integration of services and that ability for a child with or without a disability to learn from each other is how we grow. Because what makes a person just grow overall is belonging and being a part of a community. And our current systems don't support that to the level that they could. Children with disabilities have a harder time accessing childcare. They have a harder time accessing, like I said, a regular early childhood program. Our current funding structures do not support working families that make over a certain wage who have significant medical and monetary needs because of the significance of their child's disability. So having the opportunity to be here today, I appreciate the invitation and also that call to action for all of us really to look at how our systems really are currently funding and supporting families, working connections, and all of these wonderful efforts that have been made are a great start, yet we're still missing a significant population of children and families that we need to be supporting and being acknowledging. So OSPI with DCYF are doing a lot of work to do that initial observation. We've spent a lot of time saying, what do we have, but what do we need? And then how do we get there? So there's a lot of visioning, a lot of work in progress, a lot of strategies to create these opportunities, but to lean into our relationships with our childcare, our families, to create inclusionary communities. How do we bind our, our cause and our passions for family and child to create communities that are truly thriving because of what we're doing together? Joanna, I'll stop there, but that's the work that we're doing right now.
Okay, thank you. And so I guess Jessica?
Thanks. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessica Tolner Cafferty. I'm with Best Starts for Kids at King County. And I want to echo Nicole's appreciation for the providers who are on this call and the partners that we have the pleasure of working with from the city to the state and everywhere in between. There's been some really incredible work happening over the last couple of years, and there is so much more needed. So I am like the squeaky wheel at the county that says, let's keep moving. We are in our second round of the Best Starts for Kids levy, and we have about $200 million of investments in childcare for King County families and providers, focused on two things: a subsidy program that either fills in gaps in existing subsidy systems or comes in on top of it up to 85% of the state median income. And then a wage boost pilot project that we are launching this year, which will provide a wage increase to childcare providers and educators for the remainder of our levy, so through 2027, and really try to capture what we have already seen evidence of, which is that wages are critical, right? People deserve thriving wages. We think of our role at the county, we're relatively new to this work, although we were a player back in the early 2000s and the 90s and prior, as really doing a couple of things. We want to think about where we have the flexibility with our funding sources to do new and innovative things that our partners may then also be able to take on. We have, because we're local funding, the ability to do some different things and try them out. So for example, one of the things we do is we don't have an activity requirement for families to access our subsidy program. We're learning a lot about what that looks like, and it's something we want to continue to talk about. And the other one is filling gaps, because as Nicole said, there is not enough funding for this to be a cohesive system in our state that serves everybody equitably. And that's something that I think we really want to shift. And in the interim, our job is saying, where can we take the incredible work that's already happening and then add to it to fill some of those gaps? We are always thinking about moving toward a vision of childcare and early learning that is holistic, that thinks about providers, that thinks about access for families, that thinks about inclusion for kiddos with disabilities or families where parents and caregivers have disabilities. We think that childcare is a racial justice issue. It's a gender justice issue. This is one that is really at the core of everything. And so I think what I would say when you talk about sort of what is the one thing, I don't know that I want to pick one thing, because I think we so often pick one lever at the detriment of others. But if I had to, I would say, I don't think we can have any conversation right now about childcare without also talking about wages. We have a workforce in King County and in Washington State that's disproportionately made up of women of color. We have a workforce that has been paid some of the lowest occupational wages historically. That sort of stood up and stayed working hard throughout the pandemic, despite not having many of the protections offered to other fields. And it is far beyond time that this field and the workforce is compensated, is treated as the professionals and the incredible actors in sort of basic infrastructure, as well as just providing such incredibly important protective factors for kids and families every day. And so I think we have to be thinking about this as much as we can as a full picture. And I think Nicole touched on a few of those pieces that we have to hold all of simultaneously. And I want to make sure we're bringing wages into every conversation we have about this.
When I just have one quick follow-up. You said something about not having an activity requirement, and I wasn't quite sure what that means.
Yeah, and so historically, many subsidy programs have required some form of approved activity for parents and caregivers. So things like working full-time or attending a four-year college, those have expanded in recent years, which we think is really exciting. We don't have an activity requirement at all. So folks don't have to demonstrate that they're working or attending any kind of program. They just have to be eligible in other ways for our subsidy program. And what we're trying to do is sort of learn, what does that look like for families? And how many families say they need childcare who don't necessarily have access because of those limitations?
Okay, thank you very much. So now we'll go to the city, Leilani.
Thank you. I also want to say thank you for this opportunity to be here, and I'm tickled to see our providers here, many of whom will keep me honest if I get out of line here. So, you know, there's really not much more to add to what's been said. I mean, I think one of the really cool things that has been happening recently is that Nicole's team, Jessica's team, and our team, so the state, the county, and the city, have been intentionally meeting every few months to try to sort of share what's new, what we've learned from our own initiatives, how can we influence each other, how can we support each other, and also how can we recognize some of our challenges and you know, work towards either supporting new legislation, talking to electeds, etc. So that's been really nice to have that opportunity to connect more intentionally with all of our public funders in this space. If you don't already know, the city has been in the childcare space since mid to late 70s with some form of childcare subsidy. It started small as part of some federal funding the city received under the Model Cities Initiative. It really started as a poverty initiative, trying to lift folks out of poverty, and it has since then grown to currently we are serving about 400 to 500 kiddos annually, and we know the need is there because we, for the first time in 10-11 years, at least since I've been at the city the last 10-11 years, we are now running a wait list, which both demonstrates the great need, but also also highlights some of our limitations even with city funding. Our eligibility is meant to supplement and augment what is currently available at the state, or has been available at the state, to recognize that living in Seattle is more expensive. So we come on top of the state's income eligibility. We always have. So we do this dance with the state whenever they raise their income eligibility. We also accordingly raise. So we are 60.1% state median income. We do go up to 94% state median income. Our subsidy is slightly shallower than currently the city, excuse me, the state and the county. And that's because we're trying to serve as many people within our finite resource that we have. And, you know, we're primarily supporting working families or families in school. I think what's we've been able to do more recently is, or we had done more recently, but we had to pause, was we were starting to support parents who were looking for work and needed a subsidy to be able to do some of those interviews and get out to job sites. So again, unfortunately, because of our wait list, we've had to pause on some of that. But whenever possible, the city's in a position, and if we're in that position, we try to kind of pilot some new things to see if that would work for our community, and then of course sharing our learnings with our colleagues to see what might be possible in other spaces. Yeah, we're also pretty eager to learn from our county colleagues around wages. I know that they're about to embark on their pilot, and we're very interested in compensation, what that looks like, what our role could be in that space. and how can we be influential with some of that. One of the things that I do say to my team, which is I know kind of a strange thing to say because we're in it, is like the subsidy by itself is not the answer. We cannot fix a broken system with just a subsidy, right? So we have to find other ways to influence, support the market, the childcare market that is not just, of course, we would always welcome new dollars for increasing our subsidies, serving more families. We would never say no to that. And at the same time, we recognize it's not the answer to fixing a broken system. So what are some other ways, other initiatives that we could support or advocate for that would help with those systemic challenges? And I think I'll stop there to make sure I'm on time.
Okay, we'll have questions for you anyway. So Lois, oh, not Lois, Susan.
I totally understand that, Joanna, because Lois and I have been kind of tag teaming on things with your group, so no problem
Well,
there.
I'm no, forgive me, but I appreciate the forgiveness. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments from my friends at the state and county and city. But I think I'm going to start with, I literally, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've said this in other rooms where it's like we invest in what we value. And that is a big statement because in our state, we don't invest much in terms of our state budget. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But when thinking about the question, what is the major challenge? And I took a totally different route than every other person on this panel. And for me, the challenge that I see as a childcare provider with nearly 40 years of experience in doing this work is undoing the systemic racism that is embedded in the childcare system regulations and policies at the local, state, and federal level, all of which are failing providers and families. That is what I see is the major challenge, because that influences things like we invest in what we value. So in our state, paramount duty means 52% of our state budget goes into our public education system, while less than 2% goes into childcare. That's a stark difference in terms of investment. So that's, I know that sounds so negative and so, but that's the truth of it. And until we start addressing those policies and regulations that undermine and undervalue the work, because of what, like even using the term activity requirement, believe it or not, that comes out of the welfare queen mentality. You have to earn this support. You don't just deserve it because you're trying to make it in this world that we built that isn't equal, doesn't provide equity in terms of access to jobs and education and all of those things. So I hope I didn't take it too far, but that's really what I see as the major challenge is undoing systemic racism within the system. And I'll leave it there.
Oh, okay. Okay, so so the league is not like, we're not providers or but we do advocacy and we have things that we support. We do education programs and those kinds of things. So I guess that's where, like, the more specific we can get on all the different ways that we can support and advocate for good childcare and early education is something that we really need to know. We need to have direction. We need to have focus because it is such a huge, it's very huge issue. And of course, sometimes we say, well, look at Sweden, but part of the problem is, sure, that would be great, but we're not there and we're not in Sweden. And how do we move things along where we are? So does anybody have some ideas? Leilani, you were talking about some new ideas.
Joanna, Angie
Oh.
has her hand raised.
Okay. Oh, there
so-
she is. Okay. Angela, thank you.
Yeah, I'm with all these policy folks on, I'm real curious and I'm a provider and I've done this work for a number of years. I left on, I was in the banking world while my mom continued to do this. I came back in to help her. And I remember saying, you've got to figure out a way to pay your staff better. And she was just doing DSHS at the time, just child, subsidy. And she said, I can't. And I went through her books and I was like, you can. So we were the first, we started out with 12 slots of ECAP through the city. City was our contractor. And now we have, I think, like 99. So we've grown with that. We have a combination of ECAP, SPP, DSHS, we use BSK funds. So I can see how the bundling of the funds allow you. Unfortunately, everybody has a rule and a regulation for why their dollars do whatever. What happens oftentimes is a family will get caught in the middle. I have a child who really needs the services of this one particular classroom. He's an ECAP child, but he's also an SPP. And in order to move him from one room to the other, if he was not in Seattle, the teacher that really deserved him across the hall, it was a barrier. I feel like we need to be a little bit better around all these barriers that we are creating. Systems can talk to each other and it's a rule. So, I tell people this oftentimes, slavery was a rule that we recognized was wrong and we abolished it. So we can get rid of bad rules. And I feel as though policy people, all of you all that are in this room together, can listen to us as providers. And we can say to you, this is not really working. And it's a strike of the pen that you all can change some things. I feel like that needs to be, that's something that the league could help us champion, is rules that are affecting families need to be limited so that families can access everything they can as though if they were going to college. When you go to college, you get a scholarship. You don't care who's paying, where, what, when. At the end of the day, you're happy you got a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, and then your child gets to walk in. We've got to do a better job on the back end of making sure that families don't have to figure out what the mechanics are. They just need the service. Thank you.
So does somebody want to respond to that?
I think everyone may collectively be looking at me. Although
I was about to jump in, but I'll let you start, Nicole.
well, one of the things, so thank you for sharing that, Angie. And I think one of the things I would just say, I think as you talk about some of the rules and changes there, I think that's a place where the league and others can be helpful, because sometimes those rules are actually laws that need advocacy and change in a different way, because they drive increases in the number of families that can access care, which is something that we want, but there are costs associated with that. And so there is a process that has to happen in order to do that. And so I think being able to hear from folks about where are some of those changes that would be helpful. And, enrollment-based pay, work activities, we've seen changes in some of those things, like we have more families who are able to go to school. There were some laws passed recently around childcare providers having access to care, but talking with lawmakers about the changes that you all want to see there, I think is an avenue to do that, because it's not always that the state agency can change those rules themselves without going through our process and our authorizing environment.
Oh, Leilani?
Yeah, I would just add similarly along similar lines. First of all, I think just for folks who may not know what the acronyms are, SPPs are Seattle Preschool Program, which is city-funded preschool through our education levy, and ECAP is state-funded preschool, which we have both. We're fortunate to have both in the city. I think, Angie, I totally hear you. The eligibility rules are challenging. And I agree with Nicole that to the extent where we can be flexible, we do our best. And there are some things that are tied to legislation. And eligibility, unfortunately, is one of them. I think since I got to the city, I would question some of the like residency requirements that we had, not necessarily the state, but that we had at the city. The thing that was difficult for me to get around was if it's legislated, you got to go through legislation to change it, Leilani. So again, I think that is a great opportunity from the leagues, from the perspective of getting the league support. Like we are, for example, our levy is up for renewal in 2025. And it's an opportunity. Every time we renew our levy, it's an opportunity to change anything that is legislated through that. And so we will be going out to the community to get some feedback, input, etc., on what we should include, what we should stop doing, etc., in the levy. So there's those opportunities those are good opportunities for folks to say to our electeds, like, this is important to us, and can we change this? It's more responsive for our community. So that, yeah, I think that's a great place for some advocacy.
Lois has her hand up, Joanna.
Okay, see, there's Lois. Yes, there, Lois. Thank you, Susan.
So I think one of the things too that would help with our various partners is to be able to look at the obstacles where the league can come and help, such as Nicole mentioned that the feds through the Childcare Development Fund block grant want states to move to enrollment base, which is closer to the private market, as well as providers being paid the first of the month, which is what happens with our private pay families. So I think that one of the things that we can talk about is what are the barriers to that happening, and how can those that are participating assist in pushing to have those barriers removed. Whether it's an investment in local or state technologies, because I know even with Best Starts is subcontracting out its payment system. So what can be done to support different organizations to make sure that that process is smoother for providers? And again, what do we need to do to move to enrollment base and payments received the first of the month? And this also applies to the city of Seattle as well, because funds are reimbursed after the end of the month. And I'm going to, here come my 1-year-old, so I'm going to wrap up my question.
Thank you. So,
Joanna, I will add that, the league could very easily work with for instance, the Greater Seattle Childcare Business Coalition, and to identify ways that you can support the childcare sector. Because at the end of the day, I mean, what Nicole and Leilani and Jessica have talked about are they're important parts of the system, but they're still only band-aids to what the real problems are. And I think lots of work, it's going to be a lot, but it has to be happening in parallel. We need to be looking at the system and going, why does this rule exist? What is behind this? Is it really necessary? And then at the same time, that investment piece, like at the federal level, like there are some ways that the state's hands are tied because of the rules that the feds come up with. So we as a childcare provider community have been reaching out to the federal people and are making headway in helping educate them, on even things like there's this thing called the portable background check where childcare providers are actually held to a far more stringent expectation for background clearance than public school teachers. It's hard for me to separate the fact that childcare is predominantly BIPOC women while public education is predominantly white women. So why aren't they held to the same standard? So that's a whole nother conversation. But it's about the safety of kids at the end of the day. And so what we need to do is we need to be looking at these things, because some of these things go back all the way to eugenics ideologies. And that's not a good basis for childcare policy. And that's where some of this racism and stuff comes into play. So I think we have to be looking at what are the parallel tracks that we need to be looking at and addressing at the same time, not one thing at a time.
So what did you call the background? What was the term you used for the background check?
You mean the eugenics ideologies?
Oh, the background check.
Oh, the portable background check.
Portable, okay. Okay, Nicole.
I just wanted to really highlight something that Susan said around the conversations at the federal level, because there's the state investment, but states alone aren't going to solve this. Washington State isn't the only state who is really taking a look at and thinking about how we fix a broken system. So that federal, the conversations with your federal lawmakers also is really important, because continued investment is needed there as well. So just wanted to highlight that. Thanks for flagging that, Susan.
So I want to confirm if I'm hearing that streamlining would be helpful to everyone. And as you know, as a person looking at things from the outside, I always feel like some type of streamlining would make it easier for me to understand too. So Angela, I saw your hand.
Did you finish your thought? I'm just was
Yes.
okay. I also think that the league, which I love the work that you all do, trying to lower my hand. What happened? Am I there still? Okay. I'm trying to lower my hand. I'm sorry. The work that you do. I think the other thing that is going to impact us really soon is many of us are running businesses, whether they're a nonprofit business or it's our own business. It's a business model that in the BIPOC community, this is somebody's, especially there's these home providers that are doing this. This is their livelihood. And TK is getting ready to shake that all up. It's called transitional kindergarten. And if the school district in Seattle begins to adopt that to where they feel like they can shore up their budget by saying, we'll take TK, we'll take the 4-year-olds, which is what our business model is, that is going to ruin us. And that has not been looked at. It's already happening in parts of Washington State, and it is not working well. Seattle has resisted it so far, but it's coming. And we're going to need the league to look at that, because they're going to have women businesses that are going to be going out of business because nobody thought about the fact that TK is going to be damaging. And so that's another piece that we need to look at on top of all these other systemic things that are happening.
So in the TK model, would they be getting the dollars for
They get the same dollar amount that they get for any student for that TK. So if they're losing, think about it. They keep saying their enrollment is they're losing enrollment. They're losing enrollment. Well, common sense for them would be, let's go down and reach and grab these 4-year-olds. So they may grab them. They're also going to grab our most seasoned teachers, because our teachers are educated and they're going to pick and pluck from that. So it's a train wreck that's getting ready to happen. And I'm concerned that the powers of be are not paying attention. And it's going to just be this critical crash that's going to happen. Shannon, I see you shaking your head.
So Shannon?
Yeah, thanks, Angie. I want to add too that it's also for folks like myself, who the majority of our families are private pay. Our whole model is based on the fact that the tuition that we receive for our oldest students helps supplement the wages of teachers, the educators who educate our infants and toddlers. And so because of ratios, right, there's group sizes and there's maximums of how many kiddos you can have in a classroom. And so in reality, our private pay families are supplementing the wages of our infant and toddler folks. So that's another issue with the TK that I think is important to address.
So do you see this? So I think one of our school board members is eventually going to be on call today, but do you see the Seattle School District reaching out or working with you or talking to you, or is TK a state issue? Is it a school district issue?
It's a school district issue from the standpoint of school districts have local control. So they can decide if they want to do TK or not. As Angie mentioned, it hasn't come to Seattle yet, but there's declining enrollment I think, across the state. And we do see it as a pending threat. Nobody's really talking about it. We brought it to when Monica Liang Aguirre was here. This was what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Angie. We brought it to her attention and she said, don't worry about it. Never gonna happen. It's happening across the state. And I think it's coming. I mean, I'm in schools and we're constantly battling for space as it is. Never mind kids. So it's going to be a problem we're going to be facing, and I would love for us to be ahead of that curve.
So King County is many school districts. So I don't know if there's anyone here from outside of Seattle at the moment. I don't, if somebody is, so.
You mean providers or?
Providers or somebody who you could talk to the city, or the county might have some answer, some response to what the situation is countywide with TK. I know that all the districts except a few are losing students in terms of the school districts. That's a common.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I can only speak for the city. And in full transparency, we have been having conversations with the district about TK, and just, you know, like, hey, curiosity question. I mean, it's kind of one of those catch-22 kind of conversations, you know, like if I don't bring it up, they won't think about it. But if I don't bring it up and they're thinking about it, I won't know, right? So you're correct, Susan. When Monica was here, the early conversations with the district were, we're not interested. It's so new, or the rules around it are so new. We're still trying to understand it. So, you know, we got our own
Let us
challenges.
know who was Monica again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I replaced Monica. Monica's our former director.
Okay.
So when you know, I was engaged with her in some of these early conversations. The conversations kind of died down, and then I came into this role about 1.5 years ago, and knowing that there was recent legislation around modifying the rules for TK, I understand that I just sort of broached the subject again, and just to kind of find out what they were thinking. And it seems to be, I will say that they are much more interested in continuing a partnership with the city and city funded preschool than they are with exploring TK, because while it is school dollars, only schools can access that funding. It is a program that's run differently, and then some of the way that we're approaching preschool. So that has been what they've said to me thus far. I have zero idea if that's truly their intention, but that's what has been relayed to me. In fact, you know, they've invited me to have more conversation around what the future of city-funded preschool might look like with the district. And you're correct, they are thinking about preschool as a strategy for increasing enrollment. Quite frankly, we're not entirely sure where these kids are going. Seattle preschool loses let me rephrase that. 25% of kids who participate in Seattle preschool end up somewhere else outside of the district. We have no idea if they're moving out of the city because it's expensive and going to like Highline or Shoreline or somewhere else. We have no idea if they're going to private school. The district has no idea where their kids are going, and it's not just incoming kindergartners, it's all across the age groups. So they're grappling with what's going on just all over their grades. So yes, thank you there's information on transitional kindergarten in the chat.
Yes,
So
and-
it is led by OSPI, or the initiative is led by OSPI.
Okay. And-
With support from I believe DCYF. Oh, Nicole, do you want to elaborate on that? Oh, and Susan, you've got your hand up too.
Yeah, and I don't know, Susan, if you want to go first, I'm happy to. No, okay. Good. So in the spirit of transparency, as Leilani said, DCYF is supportive of transitional kindergarten as we really think about how we're serving all of our fours with access to high quality early learning experiences. And we support a mixed delivery system that includes childcare, both centers and homes, state funded pre-K, federal pre-K, the programs that Ryan oversees at OSPI and transition to kindergarten. And there are rules that there was legislation that passed a couple of sessions ago and rules that are coming out. And again, OSPI oversees this program to help sort of talk about and help districts think about how they're working with early learning providers. During this last legislative session, DCYF did just receive funding for coordinated recruitment and enrollment, which we are hopeful will help have conversations at the local level around helping families find the early learning program that best meets their needs. And TK may be one of those, childcare or state-funded pre-K may be another one of those. And so I think as we think about access, we know we're not serving all children. So just wanted to note that in the conversation, but I will turn to Susan or Ryan to talk a bit more.
So
Well, I'll
let's go
talk about it from
Susan.
the provider perspective. So I sat in meetings where the rules were shared for TK, and unless something's changed, there's only 8, and there's not very many of them. But the bottom line is TK is not subject to the same licensing regulations that licensed childcare is. So there is a discrepancy there, and there's an inequity there because we're being held to a standard that public schools are not. So let's be clear about that. Let's also be clear about the fact that there's not one rule that OSPI can place on childcare or preschool kids, because local control in one governmental entity doesn't govern another. There's no authority to enforce anything. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my layman's understanding of how this whole thing works. So I just want people to be clear that we're talking about systems that don't necessarily are not accountable to each other and have different standards for the different players that are in them. And that is one of the greatest concerns, is because quality in licensed childcare says you have to have these ratios, all these requirements have to be met. And none of those have to be met in a preschool class in a public school. How do you justify that? How do you square that? You can't. So the league, those are areas where you can push also and say, why is that? You either say no rules for anybody or everybody, or what's the happy medium? Maybe there's some more realism that can be brought into the childcare system so that OSPI isn't against being licensed because it's so onerous, and childcare can have maybe a shot at being in existence while this is happening. So I mean, as a person who's been doing this work a long time, please forgive if I'm being too abrupt or too direct, but we got a long ways to go and we don't have a lot of time to wait. So anyway, that's, happy to participate with the league on anything to make sure that the injustices that exist now don't exist in the future, so everybody has a fair shot and kids come first.
Okay, so then, thank you. So Ryan and then Leilani, and did I see another hand? So Ryan,
Right. I am representing OSPI. I am not from the office that is overseeing transitional kindergarten. I will say that right here. What I am here for is to advocate for children and families that are navigating these systems that do not always support them. So I will say I hear what you're saying collectively. Transitional kindergarten has shook the system, and if we don't find ways to systemically address how our systems and our policies and procedures don't work together, that we're going to continually hurt those that are currently in this work, which I am absolutely aware of, and ask that we had that. Our childcare providers and early care in general is truly the foundation of the cusp of what keeps all of our economies moving forward. What I will say to that is that there needs to be more options available for children with disabilities who don't currently meet the policies and or eligibility requirements for existing systems. Childcare providers, I am not going to speak for you, but I can say in my experience from what I've heard from our families that call in desperation to figure out how they can navigate a system that doesn't work for them. It doesn't work for them, period. So transitional kindergarten is an option. I think what we are doing is we're hearing this call and we are recognizing that there is a need to hear where we are hitting the road and doing great things and where we're missing the mark, so that we can be more intentional and collaborative. And that's where Nicole Rose, our executive director, Samantha Bowen, are making those steps, are taking those steps to hear voice. Yet there is an opportunity to ensure we're serving all children, and not at the expense of those of you that are really leaning into this. This is important work, and it's not a program that's creating the problem. It's a system that we're navigating within, which is more difficult. And I hear your struggles, and I also can speak to our families and our children that are in some ways truly experiencing that desperation on more visceral levels at times. And I'm not comparing that at all. I hope you understand that. Like, it's just, there's no winner here. And we just want to make sure we're not losing that perspective as well. We gotta figure something out.
so I thought Leilani, I had said you, but do you still want to talk?
I do, but Angie, did you raise your hand before me? I just saw it, noticed it now. Okay.
My hand's after you.
Okay. And I appreciate what both Nicole and Ryan have said. One thing I want to add is we are supportive of any effort that creates more access for kids. That is a fundamental truth. And we are also very supportive of trying to support our provider community so that they don't go under. I mean, that's one of the things that we've tried to do during COVID. And I think we all tried to do some extra things during COVID to make sure that didn't happen. When we were looking at when I was just trying to share sort of like my experience with the Seattle Public Schools thus far, I will say that even if they decide to participate in transitional kindergarten, they do not have the capacity to serve every 3- and 4-year-old in the city. And I know this because we recently have been doing some analysis late in the day, analysis of like the number of kids in the city, what are the options available, and even if they participated today or tomorrow, what have you, they would not have the capacity to serve every kid in the city. And parents, we also believe in parent choice, and a lot of parents need before and after care, childcare. 6 hours a day, 180 days a year is not the model for them. And so even if it, like right now, we have Seattle preschool in schools, we have it in our community-based providers because parents need the choice that works for them. And so that's why we're really pushing a mixed delivery system rather than just going with the district or just going in a certain way, because parents are going to need what they need, and we're very clear that the district just doesn't have the capacity to serve every kid. I think the last census we were given, there's about 11,000 3 and 4-year-old kiddos in the city of Seattle. Many of them are in informal care or in family childcare, which is another space that we need to do more exploration. So I think that, I think that there's some room there for us to figure this out together, if that ever comes to pass. I'm speaking for Seattle.
So I'm going to go to Angela, Sandra, Lois, and then I saw that Liza Rankin from the Seattle School Board joined us. So then I'm going to see if she has some response. If she's heard, I don't know if she's heard very much of the conversation, but so Angela? go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Leilani, for that. I just know that it won't take the school district even attempting to do some of this to ruin some businesses, because the school district has a lot of providers that they partner with. So it would be one nice thing to do would be to say that they can't displace a program to do their own program. And that would be something that would help safeguard those organizations that for years have been partnering with the school district, for them to say, you've got to go because we're going to put our own program in. They only have to do it with 5 different programs, and that would really harm. So they don't have to try to take on all of the children. Even doing it with 5 would harm 5 different programs that have a preschool right now. And the first thing they're going to say is, that's my space, I want it back. So maybe there's something that we could do to say, school district, you can't displace a child care community partner, which we fought with levy dollars to say that every new building built was supposed to have a child care space. So maybe we could put that into place. That would help safeguard some things. The other things that I think we need to do is Ryan's conversation, how she's looking at TK is different than how I think some others. I completely agree that there should be more spaces for children that have disabilities, those children, but I don't think that's how everybody is looking at TK as a transitional kindergarten. Some are looking at it as a straight, if you meet an income qualification, if you meet a geographical area, you can come into my preschool program. So we've got to be clear about what we're talking about. Our partnership currently with our schools that have the disability, what's the program called? Oh, goodness, I'm blanking out too.
Is it developmental?
Developmental preschool?
Developmental preschool, love it, love it. I love my children that go there. We have seen improvement in children that weren't talking, weren't socializing. Between the two of us, between what we give and what you all give, has been great. Problem we have with that is, how come the federal dollars don't follow that baby back into the child care, where they're with 3 teachers and 10 kids, they come bumbling back with me with a ratio of 1 to 10, and I still gotta do my best to take care of it. So there's some inequities in all of this that I think the league could do this too. The league could fight and say, it has to be an equitable table that providers are at the conversations when we're getting ready to make some of these changes. We need to say that as a city of Seattle, we support all of these models, and we need to have all of these voices there. Don't let them make rules without us being there at the table, because it's too late. It's too late for us to have to fight and advocate, and we're tired. We stayed open during the pandemic, okay? Give us some respect now. Don't try to make a bunch of rules and then say, if you guys don't like it, go advocate around it. That's not fair. We should be able to be there as these rules are being developed. As Susan said, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If the school district can do ECAP and they don't have to have a child care director, they don't have to have licensing, well, that's a cost if they don't have to have that. All of us that have to have a license to have ECAP, that's a cost. So let's make it equitable. And that's all I'm saying is, we're here now. You hear our voices. We're raising our hands. We're willing to be at the table as you guys grapple through this. Don't sit in ivory towers making rules and then handing them down, and we have to be subject to them. Not fair.
So, thank you. So Sandra, and then Lois.
Thank you very much. Once again, I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you. As we grapple with all of these problems, one thing that I think that the League could help us with is exploring revenue flows. We know we can't depend on one source to take care of problems and support our families. So as we start to gear up for a legislative season, if the League would kind of work with us to look at possible revenue sources to help with the initiatives, it would be so powerful and give us a support system to fall back on. Thank you.
Hey. Yes, so Lois.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I think one of the things too that's very helpful is Susan had touched on this a while ago about the different systems that are put in place that make it challenging to be able to, for childcare providers to keep their doors open. And I think one of them is just being unable to even make decisions about who's hired, what qualifications they can have. I think anything outside of health and safety is very, there should be a little bit more autonomy for those small businesses to be able to decide who they would like to have work for them. And I think that goes to the professional development mandates, not having access to the various trainings for those where returning to college, because it is a requirement for those who are returning to college to be able to access the community-based pathways, and or just simply if you have someone who has a heart for the work and they've shown that they have good outcomes by the way that their children are prepared, then that's something that is taken out of the provider's hand as we're trying to help our staff navigate so many unfunded mandates. So I know that is something that I think the League can be able to assist with, and being able to advocate for ways to support the field in providing quality outcomes for children without having to face barriers that for some folk can be insurmountable.
Well, that would be a very interesting conversation on its own. So Liza Rankin. So I saw you come in. You came in just at the very moment when we were discussing TK and some things around Seattle School District. And I know I didn't invite you here with this subject in mind, but I was wondering if you have a response to any of this.
Well, I missed, hello, everybody. I missed a lot of what the context for the conversation was. But
the context was that TK could really hurt private providers because they would skim off the slightly older kids where the staffing ratio isn't as intense.
So we don't have TK in SPS, as far as I understand. It's an opt-in. It's depending on the district, and right now Seattle Public Schools doesn't have TK, unless I missed something.
You don't, and our hope is that you don't.
True.
Our hope is that you don't want it.
Yeah, I don't. There doesn't seem. I don't. What I have seen from my understanding of around the state is that districts that do have TK are missing other preschool opportunities. And so like there's not preschool. And so they're like, well, can we offer a year of kind of preparatory before kindergarten, excuse me. And you know, we have a Seattle preschool program, and you know, the various providers that access that. So that's my understanding, is that transitional kindergarten is not not.
That's good news to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for 100% sure, but you know, I've been on, this is my 5th year on the board, and it hasn't come up as a, hey, do we want to consider this? Because it's really meant to meet a need that is not a need that we have in terms of access to early learning. But I will also, what's that?
Oh no, finish your thought, Liza.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say, but you know, I'll keep in mind and remember that if it does come up, which I don't think it will, but if it does come up, that I can reiterate, you know, that's really meant to sort of accommodate districts who don't, or in cities that don't have the opportunity to provide other preschool programs. And it's, you know, 1 year instead of 3. So it's not something I see us needing to incorporate.
So
But so in terms of all the other things that I heard mentioned, what gets really can be very frustrating for everybody is the different streams of where the funding comes from and who gets to decide how it's spent. So I'm sure that providers that are on the line already know this, but you know, ECAP is run by DCYF. It's a state program. Head Start is a federal program, which means it's grants basically. And then developmental preschool is also a federal program and authorized by OSPI, which is the state superintendent. So that is something that is federal money through local school districts, and it has requirements about you know, the length of day, what services can be provided. And as beneficial as developmental preschool can be for students, my main complaint about it is that, well, for a time, that was all that you had. If you have a child with disabilities in preschool or younger, you can access it. And so I'm actually the right person on the board to answer these questions, because my kids went to the experimental education unit, which is through the Herring Center at University of Washington, and they braided all of this funding in to meet the needs of students with and without disabilities in a way that other people haven't been able to replicate necessarily. So the restrictions that they all come with are because they're intended to meet a certain need, which is on the one hand really great, and then on the other hand, it makes it very challenging to let kids be kids together regardless of their need. It really kind of segregates kids based on need. So the Seattle preschool program is a step towards being able to incorporate some of those things, because it has a sliding scale, and because multiple different providers can access essentially grant funding from them, including Seattle Public Schools. We're a grantee, right? So when we have a Seattle Public preschool, or Seattle preschool program site in a Seattle Public Schools, it's our staff, and it's overseen by the school district, and we're the grantee. The same way independent provider might be the grantee of Seattle preschool program to provide that service to their kids. So we have to meet the same requirements that other providers meet in terms of the you know, what they expect, the level of what's being provided, you know, kind of the you know, they don't just hand you the money and then say you do whatever you want. They have a set of requirements. And so and they're started to add and have increased over the last few years the number of SPP plus classrooms, which are for students with and without disabilities. I think every classroom should be SPP plus, or it should just be SPP, and for any kid to go there. And if if they require services, to have them provided there. I hope eventually we get there one day. I have seen some really successful co-location of developmental preschool with SPP, where the children can be in developmental preschool for part of the day and then access SPP. But as somebody was saying, just as I joined the call, the funding doesn't follow them anywhere out of that program, because it's really limited to that 2.5 hours twice a week, or whatever the restrictions are. It's very prescriptive and doesn't allow for a lot of interaction with typically developing peers, which is a big miss. You know, for some kids can't tolerate a whole day of preschool, and that's just right for them. But some kids really need that targeted support, and then to be included with their peers and have a full day experience. And so trying to figure out how to meet the needs of those kids within the restrictions of different funding models can be tough.
So all of a sudden I'm thinking, I'm sure that somewhere I'm missing something, but what's the difference between a preschool that's in a school and a transitional kindergarten? Because I always think, is transitional kindergarten preschool also?
Well, that's my understanding, is that they're basically calling it that so they don't have to start when kids are 3.
Oh,
It's
It's the preschool. It's a clever way of calling it that so they can get the same dollars for every student. So it's clever. Yeah, it's clever.
But it's
transitional
basically
K,
just gives you 1 year instead of 2 years. So if
Right.
it's preschool, it's from age, it's from 36 months to
Right.
5 would be preschool according to the state. Transitional kindergarten, it just starts 1 year before kindergarten.
Right. It's for kids who missed that August 31st cutoff.
Yeah.
If their birthday's on September 1st, you're not eligible for kindergarten.
but the
You
Seattle
could- yeah.
preschool program is for which age?
So our preschool program, hi Liza, Leilani from the city of Seattle.
Hi.
We start at 3 and we go.
Oh, and correct, if I said anything inaccurate, please correct me.
You were good. You were good. I'm very impressed. Yeah, and providers here will keep you honest, I promise you. We start at age 3. We prioritize 4-year-olds, but we do start at age 3. And they can be in our program until they transition to kindergarten. So if their birthday's on September 1st and they're 5, we still serve them in Seattle preschool.
And do you work with the regular, just regular providers to provide? Go ahead.
We're a mixed delivery system, and what that means is we contract with the district as a provider. We contract with childcare providers, and we were one of the first in the nation to contract for family childcare with city-funded preschool. I know the state has done some work with ECAP in family childcare also, but with city dollars, we were one of the first cities to do family childcare for city-funded preschool. Excuse me.
I
So
think the challenge, Joanna, with any of these programs, TK, they're school year only for the most part, and school day only. So for working families, it's not a great option for them. And then they're left with this, how am I supposed to go to work if my day ends at 3 or 2 or whatever it is that program ends at? And this is that thing about, when you look at who are these systems designed to actually help, and who are they helping? And those that are furthest away from educational opportunities are often the families that don't have the flexibility to work remotely and all those things. So as wonderful as SPP and TK might appear in some contexts, there's still a component to it that is inequitable and unjust. And those are things that we have to grapple with and solve.
yeah. So how many hours? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I would argue that even for elementary school, that's the same situation, is that the funding, that these programs are not actually designed to support families. They're designed to meet they're designed to basically meet like the minimum thing that must be met to provide education. So it's, you know, if your student, if you have a child who's, you know, older than 36 months, you know, or actually if you have a toddler, you might qualify for an early learning program for a child with developmental disabilities that is an hour and a half twice a week. Now that is great to be able to have access to support and services and support their future education and, you know, developmental benchmarks. But if you can't, you know, what if your child is in a home daycare and you're working, they can't take your child to access 1.5 hours of services. So how do we build other support systems around these funded educational opportunities, especially for students with disabilities, that allow low-income families and families without flexibility to actually access what their child is supposed to be entitled to? But it's because it's not designed to meet the needs of the family. It's designed very narrowly to say, okay, according to, and it's usually connected to disability, you're guaranteed, you know, this early learning support because your child is in birth to 3, but it really doesn't account for at all how you actually get the kid there, and then what they do the rest of the day.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for you to access that if you're not on some other systems. Now, to Nicole's credit, DSHS or DCYF, they have a really good system of looking at children who have special needs, who need some required additional services. You can sometimes access that and round out your picture, bring somebody into that space to help out. But if they're on BSK or the city of Seattle, they have none of that. So, so there you have a child that needs these services. Sorry, you're not in this program, so we can't get it. So it's so difficult for families to navigate that also.
So
and even without transportation.
I want to ask a question of Leilani or somebody. So how many hours a day are most students in the Seattle preschool program? And then so how many hours a day are they usually served there? And then what happens before and after that?
So our program requirement for Seattle preschool is 6 hours, 5 days a week, 180 days. We essentially follow the school year. We have the opportunity to offer childcare funding for folks who need childcare before and after. So if a kiddo's in one of our Seattle preschool programs and needs childcare, they may be eligible to get a voucher to sort of pay for the whole day. One thing we started doing, and another thing we're exploring. So the thing that we're doing is we started offering summer funding during right after the pandemic sort of came and went. We continued to do summer funding. So some programs will actually get our funding year round, but it's still a 6-hour day. So we are exploring doing what the state is currently doing around what's called working day, state funded preschool ECAP, which is paying for 10 hours so that a child can be there all day and not have to worry about, and the provider doesn't have to worry about where's the funding coming from, and they, you know, recognizing the need for childcare.
And
so
so
that's
is
what
that
we're
all does that all happen at the same site?
That's our goal, yes, to the extent possible. That is what that's why we have a mixed delivery system, because many parents do need childcare. And even if the school district's available to them, they'll prefer someplace where they can get childcare.
Can I just clarify though, that if you're a childcare provider, you're providing equal quality to an SPP. You know, when they say childcare, please don't misunderstand that we're not doing quality education. And that I think is often something that happens in these kinds of settings, where then those of us who are licensed childcare get characterized as something less than, when we are equal to, and in some cases better than, because we do full day, you know, 52 weeks, 5 days a week services versus 180 days 6 hours a day. So I just have to advocate for the rest of us who may not be ECAP or SPP or any of those things. We are not less than.
Okay,
Well
so,
said, Susan. My apologies.
so
We should
we're
call it
pretty-
something else besides
So
childcare.
Susan, I'll recognize Susan Lee. I want to wrap, we'll probably go we'll probably go a little bit past 4:30, but just another 10 minutes probably. So Susan Lee.
Oh, thank you. You've had wonderful feedback from my team here, so I trust that they're able to share that with you. I do want to bring one aspect, which is the importance and the impact that early learning childcare providers provide, which is different than traditional, the TK or the traditional 6 hours. I want to emphasize that the people that we're serving are BIPOC communities, multilingual, multicultural, from low-income families. So those are the people that we are serving. And the 6 hour is not sufficient to serve their needs, because even for ourselves, I mean, I'm working 10 hours, 11, 12 hours, right? Let's just be real. And if I had a child, thank God she's not a 3 or 4 year old any longer. But I remember how difficult it is to pick up my child. And if it's only a 6 hour care, that means I am minimizing my income for my family, for example. It means that I'm limited with providing stability for my family. And that's something that we really need to recognize, especially when I've heard us talking about equity and, being the change to the cycle of racism and inequity and all of that. And so I really want to highlight that there's a lot of different avenues, different programs, and different designs. However, I do want to also emphasize that I'm also part of the Seattle Preschool Program, that these are professionals that know what they're doing. They design a curriculum. They design a format that has been well thought out and that is working. So with the childcare crisis that's happening right now, this is nothing new. And because we already have a system and professionals in place with people that are dedicated to working with families that are under-resourced and underserved, why not invest in that so that we can get out of different methods and different strategies? This is working. What we're doing works. We see it in the test results. We see it in the children's growth, their social and emotional, all of that, their language acquisition. It's proven what we're doing works. What's missing is the support that's necessary to keep it running and to not just sustain, but to make it flourish. I think that's really where we really need to think about it as well. It is not a broken system in the sense that we're doing the work that works. It's very impactful. We're making the difference. What's broken is that there isn't enough investment financially to support that growth. And that's where we really need to highlight that.
Well, it seems like the financial investment is really, to me, it seems complex because you've got the wages, you've got wanting to bring more people into it. Just before this meeting, I was talking to a friend who said, who's a grandmother, and she said, oh yeah, my daughter was thinking of going into being a preschool teacher and got some credentials. And then she went to look for a job and she got a job that she was excited about, but then they didn't have room for her kids. And she said, well, I can't take this job unless, you have room for me. So it seems like the lack of stability in the workforce is also an issue, along with the streamlining or understanding the flow of funds, how somebody gets funded for this. And then Liza brought up, it seems like this really, a lot of the ways the funds flow really encourage segregation. So I think that would be another concern. I'm not sure if somebody has an idea of a follow-up meeting that we could have, because it feels like we need to have a follow-up meeting where maybe we get a little more specific on next steps or something. And we probably would invite the state lobbyist on this for the league to join us. Would that be something people would be interested in doing? Sarah Beth?
I just thank you for summarizing it that way. And I would be interested in knowing what the next steps are that can be helpful. And I want to thank this panel. It's been excellent. I've learned so much today. And thank you for organizing it, Johanna. But yeah, I think the league can do a lot here, and I hope I can be part of it.
So I think I'm going to stop recording now.
I
and
see
then-
Jessica's hand also.
Who had their hand up?
Thanks, Angie. I do. I just wanted
Oh,
to
there you are, Jessica. Sorry.
no, please don't be. I really appreciated this, and I have also learned a ton today. So as always, I just wanted to offer a quick reframe that we've been sharing with our own elected leadership at the county, which is that I think actually the reason that this is so complicated is because it's not fully funded. So I think we talk a lot about how complicated this would be to fund. It actually isn't. The reason we have complicated systems, the reason we have complicated equations for how to determine if a family is eligible or not is because there's not enough funding for all families to be eligible, right? The reason that it's complicated, which rules folks have to follow, or whether or not you can qualify for additional supports as a provider, is because there's not enough funding. And so policymakers are sometimes really thoughtfully and sometimes less so making decisions about how to use limited funds. And so just want to offer the reframe that actually I think this is a system that if it were fully funded at a foundational and federal level, not that there wouldn't be room for creative local opportunities to build on top of that, but if this system were fully funded, it would not actually have to be that complex. We could have a beautiful multimodal delivery system.
You are so right.
Right? And
Yeah.
and providers and educators could be paid thriving wages for this critical work, and families could have access that was based on their income, right? Or like shockingly free, which I know is something we're probably not supposed to say out loud, but I'm saying it. And so I think that's really the issue. And it's until we have that foundational funding that we end up doing this sort of patchwork approach. So thank you.
And Lois, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I do want to piggyback on what Jessica just shared and say that part of that too is the lack of respect for those that work in the field. And that goes back to, as Susan in her introduction talked about, the systemic barriers that the field faces to be able to be recognized as professionals and to because once that happens, then it makes sense to be able to invest in it. As Susan just put in the chat, we invest in what we value. So I think where the league can make a difference is in changing that narrative so that the field is looked upon as professionals, and that in tune, and to point out those systemic things that have, if you talk about a field that started with either enslaved or otherwise in bondage, primarily women, it definitely fits in with what the league has always stood for, and that is empowering women to be able to support their families and to control their own lives. So I think being able to remove those barriers in conjunction with funding the system, because we don't want a system that, if it's fully funded, but yet then providers have more barriers or challenges to be able to obtain that money, because those systemic policies are in place that simply say you don't deserve this money. And because we don't feel like you know what to do with this money, we have to continue to put rules in place to control how you operate. So being able to do both together is what will be groundbreaking and really make for the league being change agents to help families and providers, as well as those very amazing women who are part of this conversation who do the policy work, because there are a lot of things where their hands are tied. And I know in personal conversations where they wish they could change different things, but sometimes they simply cannot. So having you there as an advocate would make a difference for the type of services that we are able to provide families. Thanks.
So I think we will plan on having a follow-up conversation. And then I think at this point, I'm going to stop recording. And I was also had asked Liza here to give us a little bit of an update on the